Karaki e taki, nā reira kia ino I tātai. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, si hei mauri ora. Koe no e hoa ma, he paku mihi tēnei kia koutou, huri noa te whenua, huri noa te ipurangi, o te tūmanako ia, kia haumaru te noho, nā reira, kia ora tātou. I'll now hand over to Tiffany with some instructions for the webinar.
Thanks, Tiffany. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Anita Reeford toko ingoa. I'm Anita Reeford, based at Lincoln University. Thank you very much for joining this webinar today. We've got a great turnout. This is co-hosted by Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research and the New Zealand Agriculture and Resource Economics Society. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the NZ areas, we're an active, friendly society, and we hold an annual conference and a few other events like this webinar. So check out our website, nzareas.org.nz, if you're interested in finding out more. But now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Sean Aoteaora. Sean is Senior Kairangahau Māori at Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research. So his work involves incorporating Māori values into economic decision making, particularly for collective assets that will enable Māori organisations to make more Kaupapa Maori attuned decisions. Sean is also part-time Māori lead for Ngā Pae o te Māramatanga, which is New Zealand's Māori Centre of Research Excellence. And in this role, he ensures that research explores how mātauranga can inform and drive sustainable and just societal practices. So today, Sean will talk to us about Whai Rawa, a tikanga Māori grounded economy. I won't take up any more time. Sean will speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we've got time for questions, and we may be able to run over the half hour if there are a lot of questions. So I'll pass over to you now, Sean. Thank you.
Kia ora reta, o tira kia ora tātai. He uri tēnei no te tairawhiti no Ngāti Porou, ko Sean Aoteaora hau. Kai mahi tēnei mō Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research, and I'll be talking about the Māori economy, which is a complex and diverse network of people, families and institutions intertwined and integrated within the New Zealand economy that is yearning to reconnect, revitalise and restore a values-based approach that ensures a timeless legacy for future generations. Today I'll present on a snapshot of some of the work that has been completed by Ngā Pae o te Māramatanga, New Zealand Centre of Research Excellence, Māori Centre of Research Excellence. And what we've discovered is that we've only just begun our journey, and some highlights will be presented and after a brief overview of the Whai Rawa research program. The goals of Whai Rawa contribute to Ngā Pae realising its aspirations of meeting 5 outcomes, particularly outcome statement 2, which is around the greater realisation of Māori aspirations and capabilities for flourishing Māori and tribal economies, environments and people, along with outcome statement 3, which is around enhancing te reo Māori, tikanga Māori revitalisation, normalisation and practice within our research settings, communities and society. The theme leaders for Whai Rawa, Sean Aoteaora, myself, Shelley Spiller and Monica Henare. Monica was an important figurehead for Ngā Pae o te Māramatanga. He always reminded us of the timeless nature of Indigenous knowledge, traditions and wisdoms. E kore e mitsu aka mihi ki aia. And the objectives for Whai Rawa are to foster and support cross-institutional research teams together and link projects ranging from capability building, participation and economic growth to sustainable resource use, governance modelling and conceptual development to enhance the Māori economy. Whai Rawa objectives are also to conceptualise and apply innovative models and strategies to accelerate the achievement of healthy and beneficial Māori economy, along with developing strategies to enhance te reo Māori and tikanga Māori within the Whai Rawa research program. And another objective is to develop capacity and better capabilities to support and foster the Māori economy and Māori economic research. The specific goals of Whai Rawa that were addressed by 4 key projects, 4 foundational projects, were to add value to the Māori economy through new theories, models, and tools that will enhance the profitability and value of diverse Māori businesses and enterprises, and then also to contribute new understandings and approaches for effective leadership and governance of Māori resources while enhancing the economic performance of Māori communities and, very importantly, maintaining consistency with Mātauranga Māori and tikanga Māori. I'll now present on those 4 foundational projects, a brief aim, objective of the project, and then some of the key findings, along with some of the key outputs from the projects as well. So our first foundational project explored the intergenerational reality of Māori small to medium-sized enterprises to better understand the economic, social, and environmental development aspirations that are embodied within the trans-historical framework of Te Ao Māori, the Māori worldview, Māori views and perspectives. So this work was led by Diane Ruffier and Lynn Carter. And the project proposed that the diverse economies framework will enable a deeper understanding of the Māori economy and its many distinctive forms, and more accurately represent the rich diversity of Māori enterprise that has evolved therein. By reframing the way in which the Māori economy is considered, the project offers insights into the key drivers, characteristics, and the values that are foundational to the creation of resilient Māori organisations, modes of economy, and strong communities today and in the future. Another project was persisting inequalities and the potential for intervention through new governance models. And this critically examined issues of good governance. So a significant problem faced by many hapu and iwi is that many governance structures are often imposed by government requirements for post-treaty settlement governance. And they emphasise the separation between the commercial activities of iwi and hapu organisations and the beneficiaries and the shareholders of those organisations, which can lead to increased inequality. So this research examined Indigenous governance and economies of iwi, Māori, and Aotearoa, and 4 themes emerged, and they were characterised as unfolding tensions. And they offer a critique as well as the basis for solving some of the tribal development challenges. And they are: how do tribes create culturally grounded global citizens? How do tribes rebalance the wealth creation and wealth distribution? How do tribes recalibrate tribal institutions? And how do tribes embed entrepreneurship and innovation within their economies? Another project also identified that Indigenous people are working in silos, the project also identified that Indigenous people were often working in silos across a broad range of governance areas, including corporate, natural resources, constitutional public institutions, treaty settlements, and traditional governance. And there's a forthcoming book that's been edited by Robert Joseph, so keep an eye out for that one, which is looking at Māori self-determination and good corporate governance. Another project looked at tribal development, and it highlighted that attempts at culturally matched tribal economic development at different periods in New Zealand history, including pre-colonial, early colonial, pre-treaty settlement, and post-treaty settlement examples. And the key findings from this project included the development of a contemporary executive authority to regulate exchange and market traditional products like painamu and titi, mutton birds. And the project also identified the importance of historical precedent and social cultural values in shaping the leadership matrix that addresses the external challenges and crises in an entrepreneurship context. And that project was led by Merita Kawhiru and John Reid. The leadership project explored how Māori leaders generate, embody, and enact leadership to make decisions that advance prosperous and sustainable Māori economies of well-being. The project was led by Shelley Spiller and Rachel Wolfgram. And the project found that collective Māori leadership is an ecosystem held together by activating a knowledge code, or tikanga Māori, cultivating ties of affection, whanaungatanga, and working the tensions. So there's some key readings that have been generated from that project there. For further information on the project, we, as Whai Rawa, also completed a project for the Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge, and that mapped the Māori marine economy, and that was called Whai Rawa, Whai Mana, Whai Oranga, creating a world-leading indigenous blue marine economy. And in tranche 2 of the Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge, we've been able to build upon the initial work that we've done in tranche 1 and look at what an indigenous blue economy is going to look like, and that project is going to be led by Jason Mika and John Reed. But for the current completed project, it identified that most Māori entities within the fishing industry have fishing interests and are engaging and succeeding in the marine economy. And the level of activity from these various organisations are on a spectrum, and they range from managing quota, developing joint ventures, through to those who are actively fishing, processing, exporting, marine farming, and also engaged in marine-based tourism. We also completed a project for the Our Land and Water National Science Challenge called Whenua Life Values, and that develops a qualitative approach to progress in Indigenous sustainability indicator suite for measuring sustainability targets for Māori engaged in the primary industries. So more information can be found in those readings there. Ngā Pae o te Māramatanga also supported a number of smaller scale projects, and these projects examine the support mechanisms for Indigenous entrepreneurs and found that services for these Indigenous entrepreneurs often need to be tailored for Māori. These projects also developed an initial framework for a Kaupapa Maori approach towards human resource management, and that was developed by Jared Ha. And we also helped whānau to explore, scope and design our own culturally responsive financial services. And this project informed the design of very localised and relevant community hapu whānau-based savings program. And that was led out by Kala Hokamo. And then in part of our seed and scoping projects, we also supported Matt Roskridge to identify the principles and models that can inform Māori and non-Māori about enterprise collaboration, informed by Mātauranga Māori and tikanga Māori. And then recently we've just completed some mahi in the climate change space. And this work identified that iwi and hapu, the governance institutions are increasingly asserting their rangatiratanga, their authority and autonomy to manage climate change risks and meet the well-being of whānau, hapu and iwi. However, there's a shortage of specific guidance for whānau and hapu with respect to climate change adaptation and mitigation. And in the report that we've recently completed, the links there in terms of the short form report and the longer form report, we provide a commentary about the risk and uncertainty, the knowledge gaps and options for climate change mitigation and adaptation for whānau, hapu and iwi, looking at it through a Kaupapa Maori, Te Ao Māori worldview perspective. So more info on this project can be found at those links. So in terms of what does all those research projects mean that have been developed and completed by Ngā Pae o te Māramatanga in our previous 5 years work, what we were able to do is synthesize all this mahi into a conceptual map for understanding the complexity of a Māori economy. And this mahi has been done or carried out by Matt Rout, who completed an internal unpublished report for Ngā Pae. In essence, what the map says is informed by our Whai Rawa mahi, particularly the work that has been done by Amo et al. In 2018, which conceived of the Māori economy as an ecosystem of collective action in which human behaviour and activities are integrated coordinates of a complex flow of ethical and energetic interdependencies. So the accuracy of the term Māori economy is, however, secondary to the nature of the economy. So this is an important facet that needs to be examined and explored further and additional work. At the moment, there is a deficit in the practical understanding of the Māori economic ecosystem, its constituent institutions, functions, and the economic outcomes across the domains of well-being, from te taiao, the environment, whānau, more that kind of social capital area, Māori economics, looking at social capital as well as into the financial capital area, and the capitalist economy, which is firmly embedded in the financial capital. So there are issues that need to be worked through, specifically with the end goal of a wellbeing economy, a Māori wellbeing economy as the guiding star that ensures that the parameters and the characteristics of the Māori economy align with the desired outcomes that are informed by tikanga Māori or Māori values and principles. But of course, the parameters of the Māori economy need to be determined to do this, but rather than take or aim for a singular definition, it might be best to take the approach that was outlined by Amo et al. 2018 around looking at a range of intersecting Māori economies and determining not just the status of each one, but how they interact with each other. So there is a key underlying tension between the Māori economy and the wild economy, and a paradox within the Māori economy itself. The tension is addressed by Rufio 2019, who explained that the central philosophical assumptions of the modern capitalist system remain solely in the tradition of individualism and economic growth, which is disconnected from societal context. As Rufio et al. Continue, though many Māori cultural values are incompatible with the basic assumptions of mainstream economic theories. Indigenous economic development, as Amo et al. 2018 outlined, is tied too closely to conformity to paternalistic notions of the real economy, while undervaluing other forms of economy that operate within Indigenous communities, Māori communities. So there exists in secular society a master narratives that suppress, deny, and devalue their reality. Amo then goes on to explain that the tension succinctly, Indigenous peoples may be torn between holding on to their traditional cultural values and attempts to maximize economic development that require jettisoning of those values. Conversely, as Hokamo et al. 2019 explained, the value system around materialism remains unattractive and unengaging for some Māori. Hokamo also notes that following urbanization, Māori adapted to a new mode of individualistic economic behavior, along with a new set of economic priorities, even though adjustment was not easy for some Māori, whose traditional values stood in stark contrast with Pākehā economic imperatives. So underpinning this tension is the core chasm between the collective institutions of Te Ao Māori and the Western emphasis on the centrality of the individual, along with the prioritization of financial capital over social capital. So in 5 years, there was very limited info apart from some statistics on the Māori economy. Importantly, we have delved into the tikanga, the values that form Māori approaches to managing resources, people, and te taiao, the environment. As I mentioned earlier, we've only just begun our journey. There's much more to do. E.g., we need a better map of the current Māori economy, the core values, the businesses, the organizational structures, and operational practices. And this work needs to be quantitative as well as qualitative. It needs to be focused on providing a snapshot of current conditions and context. There is to generalize too much focus on normative and optimal cases. More work is needed on the actual, the gritty, and suboptimal. More work is also needed on examining the interface between the Māori economy and the wider settler economy, looking for areas of both alignment and discord. So the concept of a wellbeing economy needs to be better defined and outlined from a Māori perspective, and how it could be operationalized and fit within the wider national economy. Kia te tiro whakamuri, ki anga whakamua. By looking backwards, we're able to walk forward. Nō reira, kia ora tātou.
Ngā mihi nui, Sean. Thank you very much for that. That was Very fascinating. Now I'm inviting the panel or the audience to type their questions into the chat function. But while people are taking a moment to do that, I guess I just pick up a little bit on your last point, Sean, about how perhaps some of these insights from the Māori economic ecosystem could be used or drawn on to expand the more capitalist kind of mainstream economy. And you mentioned like identifying areas of alignment and discord. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, or do you have any insights from the work that's happened already about how what this might look like?
Sure. So I think that there's a recent report that's been released by the Parliamentary Commission for the Environment on Wellbeing Economies. And what that report identifies is that there's a lot of opportunity to bring in different types of assessments and measurements to include the more adequately environmental perspectives into our budgetary processes. And I think that environmental focus really resonates with some whakaaro from our Te Ao Māori perspective, where the Te Ao Māori perspective is a holistic one which acknowledges that people are part and parcel of the environment, that are intimately connected with the environment, and that the well-being of people is often connected to the well-being of the environment or the ecosystem. For example, there's kōrero that goes ko te awa ko I am the river and the river is me. And that refers to the Māori belief in the connections between people and between ecosystems that are described in this concept called whakapapa, or connections between people, and then also connections between ecosystems and even the flora and fauna within those ecosystems. So modern notions of deep ecology or sustainability, or kind of sustainability that goes to the next step rather than just sustainability at the margins, but sustainability that might be related to notions of circular economy and so on, do have some overlap with that Te Ao Māori perspective. But I think what's important to note is that we, in our economic policy space, we try not to co-opt or redefine whakaaro from a Māori perspective or concepts from a Māori perspective and give them new names or definitions and interpretations. I think what's important in the policy space is ensure that the essence of the concepts, such as kaitiakitanga and manaakitanga, are actually embedded within the worldview context from which they came. Otherwise, by giving them, saying that they're equal to notions of circular economy or sustainability, can often, kind of change the meaning of those concepts. So when we do try and find those areas of alignment, we just need to take care that we're not trying to redefine those concepts, and that we actually empower Māori, iwi and hapu to be able to choose their own path towards economic development.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We've got a few questions coming in now, Sean, so I'll just pick a few. So one is, in Western economies, a key incentive for entrepreneurship is often personal financial gain compared to collective benefit. And have you identified any difference with Indigenous entrepreneurs?
Yes, we have done some work that has identified that there are certain characteristics and attributes of Māori and Indigenous entrepreneurs. A lot of this work has been carried out by Jason Mika and Matt Rosridge. So I could probably just talk about it on a surface level, but I would follow up with the work and those resources that I put up on the earlier slides that refers to Jason's work. And I think some of the key characteristics include, as well as from Carla Hikamo's work as well, is that there often is, from some Indigenous entrepreneurship, probably that more of a connection to the local environment. So being mindful of the different types of impacts that the activities might have, and probably actively making actively including processes within the development of their products or services that ensures that the externalities are internalized, or that you mitigate those potential impacts that might be caused by the creation of those services or goods. And then at the same time, there is that feeling that whānau is quite an important notion in the way that we run a business, and so that there is often ways to look at building capability of rangatahi who might be connected into that whānau. So that's rangatahi or youth, so that they are building their own skill sets to participate within that business. And then also probably another characteristic is looking at ensuring that what is carried out, that there is some intergenerational benefit. So it's often not just a characteristic of just Māori Indigenous entrepreneurs, but often of Māori corporate enterprise as well. Some of the holding institutions that manage the assets from the post-treaty settlement governance era. These institutions also have some deep thinking around ensuring that the way that they manage or extract resources is in a manner that ensures that the sustainability of those ecosystems and those taonga species that they are fishing, for example, or they might be harvesting. So, for example, a key organisation that carries out this more intergenerational long-term thinking and the management of their resources is Moana New Zealand, Māori Fishing Owned Company. So, for example, they've got kaitiakitanga as one of their core principles that inform the way that they go about their businesses, and that principle informs the types of practices that they carry out in terms of fishing, and often at times they are an industry leader in the sustainability practices, while others within the sector may not be doing the same type of practices and often exploiting those resources.
Thanks. And just quickly, we've got quite a few more questions coming in. So for those of you who have to leave at 11, this will be recorded and you'll be able to listen to what we continue to discuss after 11. And if your question isn't answered even beyond 11, Sean has offered to receive all the written questions and respond at some level to them. So we'll just pick a few more for those of us who can stay on. This is one that's close to my own heart. Do you have any thoughts on knowledge priorities for Māori enterprises adapting to the climate emergency, Sean?
Any priorities? So in our report that Ngā Pae did for identifying some of the risks to climate change for Māori, in the Whai Rawa space, the Māori economy space, there are a couple of key risks that we identified. In particular, the Māori economy is quite closely aligned to the primary sector. So we've got a lot of Māori organisations, trusts and corporations that are involved in agribusiness. And we've got some key assets in horticulture, particularly in kiwi fruit. And then there's also quite a number of assets in the forestry sector. And not to mention the fishing sector as well. So there's quite a number of risks that are faced by each of those sectors within the Māori economy. So, for example, if you look at the agribusiness, agribusiness in the eastern seaboard of the country is going to be facing challenges such as droughts and more severe weather events or extreme precipitation events like flooding. And if you're quite prone, if you're in a catchment, which is where most Māori land is. Most Māori land is on moderate to severely prone erosion land. So anytime there's a tropical cyclone or ex-tropical cyclone or a low pressure system that comes from the north and interacts with our ranges, it's more likely to create these atmospheric river events, which can create so much precipitation within a short amount of period. And it makes, and your agribusiness farms are pretty much vulnerable if the catchment doesn't have enough, and upper catchments don't have enough tree coverage. So if those areas have been harvested, or the harvesting practices have resulted in a lot of slash or like offcuts being generated on those hills, and those offcuts during a flooding event, they all move into the streams and creams and the creeks and streams in the upper catchment, and then they flow down into the lower parts of the catchment, get clogged up in those streams, and then eventually end up on the beaches. And not to mention that there's severe risk from erosion as well. So people really have to think about forestry management practices in terms of harvesting as well as planting, and making the right decisions around the right tree in the right place with respect to agroforestry. Some areas just aren't suited for sheep and beef and ought to be transitioned into forestry, whether it's pine or whether it's indigenous forestry. But the challenge at the moment is that the government has let the market decide what those priorities ought to be. And that's kind of putting people in a tight spot in terms of not, if particularly whānau Māori, who don't have access to capital to be able to get into indigenous forestry or plantation forestry like Pinus radiata. Then also in the other main risk is the risk to our key taonga species, where a lot of our quota has tied up in, and that's in our inshore fisheries such as pawa and crayfish, and then there's also the non-quota species and pawa, crayfish and kina. And they're quite vulnerable to changing climatic conditions such as ocean acidification, and which will lead to making the water quite toxic. And for carbon-based life forms, it can reduce the hardness of the shells and their survivability and their vulnerability to diseases. So those, I think, probably the two issues that I think that Māori face. But then there's also some assets that are owned by the post-treaty settlement governance entities, the asset holdings institutions, and they have property in low-lying areas. So sea level rise also poses a significant problem for those hotels and other commercial property that they may have invested in. But additionally, in terms of the Māori economy in general, if we look at alternative economies or the multiple perspectives of economies, well-being is also generated from being able to access marae for hui and other types of functions. And so if marae are vulnerable to flooding events, from those atmospheric river events, then that could detrimentally pose a loss of well-being for whānau, for hapu and iwi, if there's damage to those marae, if there's damage to urupa as well. So the urupa are those burial sites. The burial sites will be increasingly in low river valley areas, and they are at risk as well. But there's a whole lot of stuff in that well-being area, more in that social capital space, which are at risk.
Yeah, no, great. I mean, I think there's a lot of areas people can follow up on, Sean. I'm just going to move through a couple more questions. There's a slightly different one here that is probably just a quick answer in a way, but are there job opportunities for Pākehā within institutions, within Māori institutions, to support tikanga Māori grounded economies? And if so, where are they?
Yeah, I think what a number of Māori institutions are doing is to recruit people who are suited for the job. So as the persisting inequalities Mahi has shown, is that increasingly what tends to happen or happened in the past was that because there were our Māori assets that were handed back, a post-treaty settlement had to be structured in a way that was separate from the social and the cultural operating arms of the Runanga Nui of the Māori tribal authorities. They were separated into the asset holdings institutions. What that meant was that there was a growing recruitment of people who are capable in managing financial capital. And so that was the focus for some of these asset holdings institutions in the past in terms of generating financial wealth. And so the tribal institutions recruited people who were adept at managing risk and increasing the returns on equity for those types of portfolios. So I think what the persisting inequalities report has found, and that was a report that was led by Jason Mika, Fiona Wedemu, also Graham Smith and Anne-Marie Gillies. So what that report found was that what iwi and hapu are wanting to see nowadays is ensuring that, yes, there are those financial goals met, but at the same time, how do you actually get a balance with ensuring that there is a balance across all the different types of well-being, ensuring that the taiao remains intact, and that we mitigate the different types of impacts that we potentially might have, and that at the same time we address the inequality issues, and by ensuring that we build the capability and educate our whānau and rangatahi to be more able and capable to participate in the different forms of Māori economy. So yes, there are opportunities for tauiwi non-Māori to help support Māori or to be a good ally. But I think the main thing is that ensuring that your ngākau is in the right space in terms of the alignment back to those values. And that oftentimes, if you're able to listen to what whānau are saying, this probably goes right across the board. If you're able to listen to what whānau are wanting to say in terms of their long-term intergenerational aspirations, then there's no doubt that there's a role for you to support. In fact, in my own personal experience on the farm committee that I'm part of, we do employ a number of consultants to provide us with advice. But what keeps us grounded in terms of a tikanga Māori approach is that we've got these core sets of values that ensure that whatever technical advice that we're provided by, could be a Māori technician or a non-Māori agribusiness consultant, the lens that we look through it is our core values for our organisation.
Thank you. Okay, so another question, are Māori farmers picking up on regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, it's quite a specific technical question that I don't have any experience
you can direct people to.
John Reid would be the person who would be best suited to be able to pick up on regenerative agriculture. I think what we are seeing, and particularly from the Te Tai Rāwhiti cases, is that people are wanting to look at different types of land use practices so that there are those intergenerational goals that are met, and kind of more critical goals in the short term are also met in terms of improving the water quality of some of the streams in the area and ensuring that there are opportunities available for whānau as well. So if you look at the institutions like Hikirangi Enterprises, which are promoting more sustainable local entrepreneurship options as a potential model, but then also in Te Tai Rāwhiti, we've got forestry companies that are also wanting to pursue a vision around the right tree in the right place, and that will ensure that there are better financial as well as environmental outcomes that are achieved for Ngāti Porou on the East Coast.
Indeed. Okay, now something a little different, I guess. Wondering how the capitalist growth-based concepts, property ownership and trading, and the resulting inequity fits or can be addressed through Te Ao Māori.
You run that question by me again.
I think it's around, I guess, how inequality and inequity resulting from capitalism and those concepts around property ownership, how that could be addressed through Te Ao Māori, or whether it fits within Te Ao Māori.
Yeah. Yeah, you raise a really good question. And I think that's probably where we're at in society in terms of charting a course forward with respect to what is the foundational macroeconomic policy that's going to achieve some of those long-term future outcomes that we want for New Zealand. Because as we can see that our current economy is based on individual, transferable, private property rights. And while it's worked for some, it hasn't worked for others. And I think if you look towards, I mean, I'm a big fan of Eleanor Ostrom's mahi in terms of looking at common property-based solutions, specifically locally ones that will enable better environmental, social, and economic outcomes. And I think those types of regimes are more likely to create fairer outcomes. And we're seeing it now with some of it's not perfect because of, in terms of the Māori economy, it's not perfect because there's a number of challenges and barriers that are in place that are kind of legacy issues with respect to the Māori economy and with respect to how it interacts with the wider national economy. So, for example, on the East Coast into Te Rāwhiti, there's a need to restore the catchment and better manage the catchment of the Waipu River, as well as the Raukumara Ranges to improve biodiversity and mitigate the impacts from climate change. And as I mentioned earlier, it's the options or policy solutions that have been offered up in order to achieve or meet the challenges from a very public goods type of problem is through the market-based solutions. And because of market failure, we're just seeing that these types of solutions, whether it's markets for ecosystem services and the like, they're not enough. I mean, they can go so far. But I think the solution probably lies within common property-based approaches, which are informed by shared collective values. I know it's hard to get that, it's a bit idealistic, but I think if you ground it in the principles and the values from Te Ao Māori, specifically for Māori asset holders, then that provides the guiding light in terms of the alignment and culturally matched activities that go along with those principles. And I think the big opportunities is then to identify what are the practices that can align to those principles, and then creating the case that a lot of the mitigation adaptation approaches, and particularly in terms of forestry, do create public goods, and that there's a case to be made in terms of wider society helping to support the creation of all those different types of ecosystems, from the increasing biodiversity through to erosion mitigation.
Yes. Okay, now, so you have answered sort of in part some of the other questions. There are still a few that remain, but I think as it's pushing 11:15, we might wind it up there. But as I mentioned, Sean will get the list of questions and may be able to provide an answer following this event. So thank you very much, Sean, for this informative seminar, and thank you to the participants who are still here online for participating. And Tiffany will send you an email following this with the recording links and any other material. So thank you again, Sean, and have a great day.
Cool. Kia ora, Anita. Thank you for sharing this session, and kia ora to everyone who's attended this webinar. I'll just close our session off with a karakia. Nō reira, kia ino i tātai. Inuhia turi tapunui a tāne, kia wātea, kia Māramatanga kau, te tinana te wairua i te ara takatā. Koe ara e rongo whakairia ki runga, tūturu whakamaua kia tīna, haumi e hui e, tae ki e. Mauri ora e hoa ma, e pai te wā whakatā. Kia ora everyone.